You went to the grocery store last week, and something felt off. Maybe you didn't say anything out loud. Maybe you just quietly put something back on the shelf that you would have bought without thinking 6 months ago. Maybe you stood in the checkout line, looked at the total, and felt that low, uncomfortable feeling in your stomach that you couldn't quite explain. You're not imagining it. Your grocery bill is higher, and it's going to stay higher for longer than anyone in the news is telling you. But here's the part that nobody is explaining. The reason your food costs more right now has almost nothing to do with your supermarket, it has almost nothing to do with your local economy, and it has almost nothing to do with the reasons you've probably heard on the news. The real reason traces back to a narrow strip of water, 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, on the other side of the planet. A waterway most people couldn't find on a map. A place that has almost no relationship to food on the surface. And yet what happened there over the last 40 days is the single most important reason your grocery bill looks the way it does right now. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how that connection works. Step by step, in plain language, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Let's start with what most people believe about food prices. The common explanation goes something like this. Inflation, corporate greed, supply chain issues left over from the pandemic, maybe a bad harvest somewhere, maybe the government spending too much money. These are the explanations that float around, and some of them contain partial truth. But here is what none of those explanations account for. Right now, today, in April 2006, the world is experiencing what the International Energy Agency has officially called the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. Larger than the 1973 Arab oil embargo, larger than the Gulf War, larger than any energy shock in recorded history. And it started on February 28th, 40 days ago. That is the moment the United States and Israel began military operations against Iran, and the moment Iran responded by doing the one thing that sent shockwaves through every economy on Earth. They closed the Strait of Hormuz. Now, you might be thinking, okay, oil prices went up. That means petrol costs more. I get that. But what does that have to do with my groceries? Everything. And the connection is far more direct, far more surprising, and far more permanent than you've been told. Let's start at the beginning. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow channel of water between Iran and Oman. It connects the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. And through this single corridor, every single day, approximately 20% of the world's entire oil supply passes. 1/5 of all the oil that powers the global economy moves through this one bottleneck. Think about what that means. Imagine your city had 5 roads leading into it. All your food, all your fuel, all your goods. Everything came in on those 5 roads. Now imagine someone blocked one of them. Completely. Not slowed it down. Blocked it. Everything would get more expensive immediately. Not eventually. Immediately. Because the same amount of stuff is now competing to move through fewer routes. That is exactly what happened to the global economy on a planetary scale when Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz. Oil that was trading at around $67 a barrel before the war began surged past $117 in just over 5 weeks, a 74% increase, in 40 days. Now here's where most people's thinking stops. They hear oil price, they think petrol price. They fill up their car, it costs more, they're annoyed. End of story. But oil is not just fuel. And this is the part that changes everything you think you know about your grocery bill. Here is the thing nobody teaches you in school. Modern food production runs on oil, not just the trucks that deliver food to supermarkets, not just the machines that harvest crops. The food itself, the way it's grown, the way it's preserved, the way it's packaged, is deeply structurally connected to oil and gas at every single stage. Let's walk through it. It starts with fertilizer, the crops that produce the vast majority of the world's food. Wheat, rice, corn, soy do not grow in sufficient quantities without nitrogen fertilizer. And nitrogen fertilizer is manufactured using a process called the Haber-Bosch process, which requires enormous amounts of natural gas as both a feedstock and an energy source. No natural gas, no nitrogen fertilizer. No nitrogen fertilizer, no high-yield crops. No high-yield crops. Global food supply collapses. Now here's the connection to the Strait of Hormuz that will make everything click. The Gulf countries, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, are among the world's largest producers and exporters of the natural gas and the chemical inputs used to manufacture fertilizer globally. And according to the Fertilizer Institute, approximately 50% of global urea and sulfur exports, two of the most critical fertilizer ingredients on Earth, normally transit through the Strait of Hormuz. When Iran closed the strait, it didn't just block oil tankers. It blocked the raw materials that farmers around the world need to grow food. Right now, during planting season, nitrogen fertilizer prices are projected to roughly double from 2024 levels, which means farmers face a devastating choice: pay double for fertilizer and either absorb the loss or pass the cost to consumers, or plant less and produce less food. Either way, the person standing in the checkout line ends up paying more. And we haven't even gotten to the second ingredient yet. There is a resource that has been disrupted by this war that almost nobody is talking about. It is invisible, it is odorless, and most people have never thought about it for a single second in their lives. It is helium. Now, before you think, helium? Like balloons? Stay with me, because this connects to your phone, your laptop, and supply chains that will affect prices for years. Qatar produces approximately 1/3 of the world's helium supply, not as a primary product, as a byproduct of processing natural gas. And when Iranian strikes hit Qatar's massive Ras Laffan industrial complex early in the war, the world's single largest liquefied natural gas export facility, helium production stopped. Completely. Why does this matter for your grocery bill and your everyday life? Because helium is an essential component of semiconductor manufacturing. Every chip inside your smartphone, your laptop, your car, your home appliance, your point-of-sale payment terminal at the supermarket checkout, all of it is manufactured using helium as a critical cooling and processing agent during chip production. Spot helium prices surged between 70 and 100% within days of the Ras Laffan facility going offline. And here is the truly alarming detail. Repairs to the Ras Laffan complex are expected to take 3 to 5 years, not 3 to 5 months. 3 to 5 years, which means even after the ceasefire, even after peace talks, even after everything calms down diplomatically, 1/3 of the world's helium supply has been knocked offline for potentially half a decade. The chip shortage that follows will ripple through every manufactured product on Earth, and manufactured products sitting on shelves, including food packaging, refrigeration equipment, logistics technology, will all carry that hidden cost. Let's add the third layer. Even for the ships that were still attempting to move through the region during the war, something happened that never shows up in the headlines, but always shows up in prices. Shipping insurance. Lloyd's of London, the global hub for maritime insurance, either canceled or massively repriced war risk coverage for vessels transiting the Gulf region the moment hostilities began. Marine insurance premiums surged, and freight costs climbed across every category of trade, not just energy. Everything. Every container ship carrying electronics from Asia, every cargo vessel carrying grain from the Black Sea, every tanker trying to navigate the long alternative routes around Africa instead of through the Gulf. All of them became dramatically more expensive to operate and insure overnight. And shipping companies do not absorb those costs. They pass them directly to the importers pass them to the distributors pass them to the supermarkets, and the supermarkets pass them to you in the form of higher prices on products that have nothing obviously connecting them to a war you're watching on the news. The t-shirt, the cooking oil, the electronics, the medicine, the cereal, the snack. All of it carries a hidden shipping surcharge that most people cannot see and almost no label will explain. Now here is the deeper idea that I want you to sit with for a moment. Everything we've just walked through, the oil, the fertilizer, the helium, the shipping insurance, none of it announces itself. It doesn't show up on your receipt as a war surcharge. It doesn't come with a label that says, this product costs more because of a military conflict 5,000 kilometers away. It just quietly inflates the number at the bottom of your grocery total. And because it happens gradually, because each individual price increase is small enough to absorb without a dramatic reaction, most people adapt without ever understanding why. This is how geopolitical events become personal financial events, not through dramatic, obvious transmission, through thousands of invisible price adjustments that accumulate silently across every product, in every store, in every country. Economists have a term for the situation this creates: stagflation, a combination of slowing economic growth and rising inflation happening at the same time. It is the most difficult economic condition for governments and central banks to manage because the two problems require opposite solutions. Fighting inflation means raising interest rates and slowing spending. But slowing growth means you need lower rates and more spending. The two treatments contradict each other. Global growth projections for 22,000 have already been revised down to approximately 2.9%, while inflation remains elevated near 4%. The European Central Bank has warned that major energy-dependent economies, including Germany and Italy, face a realistic risk of entering technical recession by the end of this year. UK inflation is projected to breach 5%. And sitting at the center of all of it is that 33-kilometer-wide strip of water and a conflict that most people are watching as a news story rather than understanding as a personal financial event. On April 7th, the United States and Iran agreed to a 2-week ceasefire, brokered by Pakistan. Oil prices dropped approximately 15% overnight. Markets surged. The headlines declared relief. And relief is real. A ceasefire is genuinely better than the alternative. But here is what the headlines are not telling you about what comes next. Oil is still approximately 40% higher than it was before the war began. Wholesale gasoline is still up more than 40% from pre-war levels despite the ceasefire-driven drop. The Strait of Hormuz, even in ceasefire conditions, will take weeks if not months before shipping backlogs are cleared and supply chains normalize. The Ras Laffan helium facility, 3 to 5 years to repair. Fertilizer prices, already committed to farmers at elevated levels for the current planting season, with consequences for harvest yields that will show up in food prices for the next 12 to 18 months, regardless of what happens diplomatically. Shipping insurance premiums, Lloyd's of London has already stated that trade into the Gulf will not simply resume. The region remains at what they call heightened risk, and premiums will reflect that uncertainty regardless of the ceasefire status. Energy and commodity markets, according to analysts at BCA Research, are likely to remain on a structurally higher floor as governments hoard and restock in anticipation of potential renewed conflict, keeping oil and gas prices elevated well above pre-war levels even in a scenario where shipping fully resumes. The ceasefire stopped the bleeding, but the wound doesn't heal overnight. And your grocery bill will keep reflecting that, not dramatically, not with obvious labels, but quietly, persistently, in the way prices have been moving for the last 40 days. And will continue to move for months to come. So what do you actually do with this information? The first thing is the most important, and it has nothing to do with money. It's about perception. Understanding that your food prices are connected to a geopolitical event, rather than random inflation or corporate greed changes how you respond to it. Random inflation feels like chaos you can't predict. Geopolitical-driven price increases follow a pattern. They spike during conflict. They partially ease during ceasefire. They don't fully reverse because supply chain damage is structural and slow to repair. Knowing this lets you make better decisions. You're not panicking at a spike. You're not being naive during a ceasefire dip. You understand the mechanism. The second thing is practical. In periods of geopolitical-driven food inflation, the single most effective personal finance response is reducing food waste to zero. Studies consistently show that the average household wastes approximately 30% of the food it buys. In a normal price environment that is inefficient, in a supply shock price environment it is expensive. Treating every item you buy as something you've already committed to consuming, before you shop, not after, is the one habit that protects your grocery budget more than any coupon or discount strategy. The third thing is slightly counterintuitive. During periods when supply chain disruptions are structural and multi-year, as the helium and fertilizer situation suggest, the companies that solve those supply chain problems become extremely interesting from an investment perspective. Industrial gas suppliers, domestic fertilizer producers, alternative shipping route operators, these are the businesses that quietly benefit when global supply chains get disrupted and need to be rebuilt. This is not financial advice. But it is how people who understand the mechanism think about periods like this. 1. Here's what I want to leave you with. The next time you're standing in a supermarket aisle, looking at a price that feels higher than it should be, you now know the story behind it. It's not random. It's not invisible. It is a chain of events that runs from a missile strike on a gas facility in Qatar, through a fertilizer shortage during planting season, through a shipping insurance repricing in London, through a supply chain adjustment in a distribution warehouse, all the way to the number on the label in front of you. The world is more connected than the news makes it look, and your personal finances are more connected to global events than most personal finance advice acknowledges. The grocery bill is not just a grocery bill, it's a receipt for everything happening in the world simultaneously, compressed into a single number that you scan and pay without reading the story behind it. Now you've read the story, and understanding it, really understanding it, is the first step toward responding to it intelligently rather than absorbing it blindly. Think about it.